I am really thrilled to introduce you to a gentleman who I saw at TED in 2008 give a remarkable talk about his work with a remarkable young man, and I'm very, very delighted that we get more than 18 minutes, which is TED's format, with Tod Machover, who's at MIT Media Lab, who's an opera composer, and who's premiering an opera in 2010 that will be complete with robots. But what's really interesting is that young people in his lab created Guitar Hero. And to me, Todd is a Renaissance man who not only is a musician extraordinaire, but also understands technology, and because he works with patients, has been able to tap people's inner spirit in a way that you would never believe what he's been able to offer people who might not have an opportunity to make music based on their physical disabilities. And I'm just thrilled to have him with us. I think he's going to give you an extraordinary hour and a half. And Tod Machover.
Thanks so much, Kitty. It's a real pleasure to be here. I was first in Aspen, about 40 years ago when I was a kid, to go to music school here. So I've been here a couple of times since then. I've been back. And we have more than 18 minutes, which is great. We don't have a lot more than 18 people. So we could make this very informal. Why don't I give you some information, and then I'll try to leave time at the end for discussion, because I'm going to cover a fair amount of ground. I was just at the end of the talk before this about terrorism and global security, and now I'm here to talk about music. So you might ask why that is. One reason is music's important. We love music. It's in all of our lives. We're here in Aspen. We've got one of the best music festivals right next door, and it's just always interesting to talk about music. But music's also fascinating, endlessly fascinating, and is very prominent right now in the public eye for people to think about and to people to try to figure out. Some of you may have seen just about a week ago, there was a 2-hour PBS special with a lot of famous musicians called The Music Instinct. 2 hours of trying to understand why music exists in every culture, what happens when we listen to music, why music gives us chills. Literally, there's research going on in that area. How many of you saw that show, actually? Not too many. It was pretty good. And then just 2 nights ago, there was yet another PBS show, this time featuring Oliver Sacks, the neurologist. Anybody see that one? I guess you were all here. You saw that one. And this show was looking at the relationship of music to people with various illnesses, especially to show a very strange phenomenon about people who once were passionate about music and then have a stroke and no longer react at all to music, very unusual things. So music is somehow very, very important right now. People are trying to figure out why people like music so much. And not only people, this NPR got into the act recently. I don't know if any of you saw this, but there was an incredible story about a month ago about the fact, one of the things about music is that a lot of us study music because it seems to be something very special to human beings. And for a long time, most scientists have said music is one of the few phenomenon that exists in every society and is special to people, doesn't exist anywhere else. Well, even that's changing now. And the research that was talked about on NPR, and this great video, I'll show you if you haven't seen it, shows that animals, not too surprisingly, I think, actually both respond to music and engage in musical activity much more than we thought. You can raise your hand if you've seen this one. This is Snowball, I guess just a normal cockatiel, but look at what he does. It's not a trick. And actually, a cousin of mine who works at Harvard, he and his students noticed that there were more and more videos showing up on YouTube with people showing their animals engaged in music activity. And first they thought it was just another YouTube kind of joke. Then they decided to follow up and see what was happening. And they, little by little, are doing research now to show that animals respond to music much more than we ever thought. So music is really, really fascinating. It touches us deeply, and we don't totally understand it. And I guess one question with all of that is, so what? All these shows are out there, lots of research going on. And the reason that I'm here today and what I'd like to talk about a bit is that all of this knowledge that we're gaining about why music is so important really only has importance if we use that to change our musical experience. Because my firm belief is that we love music, it's wonderful, it's fun, it's entertaining, but it's much more than that. Music is one of the deepest experiences that we have, and it can truly change our lives. And for music to reach its full potential, we have to change music. We have to change the way it's written, the way it sounds, the way it's enjoyed with the public, the way we share music, and how we participate in music. And that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit this morning. The key to making music part of everyone's lives, I think, is that somehow you have to find a way to participate in it. You have to actively be involved in music. So the Mozart effect, which a lot of you have probably heard about, which was popular about 5 to 10 years ago, which said that all you have to do is put music on in the background. You could even listen to elevator music. You could play music in vitro to your unborn child. This was enough to raise IQ points by 10 or so. Really attractive idea, but that doesn't work at all. Turns out that you have to participate in music to get any effect from it at all. So what I've been involved with for the past 20 years or so at the MIT Media Lab is how to make music even more involving for people who are professionals and to allow everybody to be involved in music. So I started this work building what we call hyperinstruments, and this was an attempt to take existing instruments and virtuosic performers to measure as much as possible about what music was being played. This is Yo-Yo Ma, of course, and how the music was being played, but especially how it was being interpreted, what feeling was behind the music. So when we worked with somebody like Yo-Yo, we built a special cello. Yo-Yo's a very, very nice guy. You probably saw that if you saw the Music Instinct. But when we talked about putting nails and glue and sensors on his Stradivarius, he balked at that idea. So we built an instrument that had all the sensors built in, but it had normal strings, a bridge, had all the measurement for the sound inside the instrument. And then we put measurements on the neck of the instrument to tell where his fingers were, on his wrist to measure how the bowing was going, and especially on the bow to measure all the nuance. Bowing for a string player is like breathing for a singer. So all the nuance of phrasing and where the music, where the tension was, where it was growing, where it was building, what was important was all in the bow. So we measured all of this. I wrote him a piece called Begin Again Again, and Yo-Yo was able to change his cello from a normal cello into a voice or a string orchestra or an electronic sound, take a melody and make the harmony appear just by the way he was playing his line. And this is a little clip of Yo-Yo playing that hypercello. So all of those extra sounds and all of the layers were all made by Yo-Yo based on the way he was playing. Now, whenever we do these crazy music projects, there's always a surprise. The surprise in this project is that the technique that we had to develop to measure the bowing involved putting electric signals, 2 chips on either end of the bow, sending the signal into the air, putting an antenna on the instrument, measuring how much electricity, where it was coming from. That allowed us to tell everything about the bow, how fast it was moving, the pressure, the angle, how much bow was being used. But it turned out that the same technique, when Yo-Yo's hand got near the instrument, the measurement went all wrong. And we didn't know why. So we went back to the lab. Actually, some of our younger students went back to the lab, found out that Yo-Yo's body, or anybody's body, was absorbing electricity out of the air. So it wasn't just the circuit, his body was absorbing electricity. So we realized that we'd made a technique that not only measured Yo-Yo Ma moving with a bow, but it also measured anybody moving their body, and it turned out to be very accurate. And along with the software that was interpreting his performance, I started thinking, you can make very sophisticated musical activities not just for someone like Yo-Yo Ma, but for anybody, because we can all make gestures to show something about how we're feeling and controlling music. If we have the right software, you might be able to move the music around. So the next project I made was called the Brain Opera, which was a big participatory opera. It opened at Lincoln Center in New York, toured around the world, and is now permanently in Vienna. If you ever get over there, there's a place called the House of Music that was built around it. And the Brain Opera had a whole series of instruments, all designed for the general public to come in off the street with no knowledge of what was going on, no musical training, and experiment. So a driving game where you drove a musical note down a series of roads. Depending on how you drove, the music would change. A gesture wall, which measured the electricity coming out of your body. So when you gestured, kind of like a crazy conductor, a big visual on the wall would change, but also large textures of sound would change. A table, a melody easel, where you could draw melodies and improvise, change both the melody, the ornaments, and the color just by moving your finger, and a whole series of singing instruments. So the public was invited into a big arcade with about 100 of these instruments, spent about 45 minutes exploring, then went into a theater like this to see a performance, where about half of the performance had been composed prepared, and rehearsed ahead of time, and half of the performance came from elements that the audience had just produced out in a lobby area right before the performance. So it was a collaboration through these kind of instruments between the audience and our team. And the big surprise for this project was that some of the work that was developed here, both the way of playing these instruments and the way of shaping music, even if you're not a professional, as Kitty said, did lead to things which you probably have heard about. So students of mine who were working with me at that time, a lot of the software that was needed to take a piece of music, change it by a joystick or by a video game play. If you're getting better at a game, the music changes but keeps the core element. A guitar, which actually the guitar for Rock Band is not a very sophisticated hyperinstrument. As you know, it's just a bunch of buttons and a little plectrum over here. But it showed that this idea that music in some form, if it's presented to the general public, is extremely attractive and can be very successful. Like most stories, it has another side. I don't know if you saw this just in the last week, but more and more professional musicians, most recently Jimmy Page, has come out, not too surprisingly, saying that, you know, Guitar Hero and Rock Band came out of my group, but like these guys, yeah, it's not very interesting. I mean, it's very popular. It's a lot of fun to play, but it's not very musical. That's what these guys are saying. They're saying that, yeah, in fact, they're saying we're not going to license our music to Guitar Hero because it's false for people to think that they're actually playing like they're inside our solo. They're experiencing our solo through this kind of video game. It's not musical, it's not expressive, it's not personal. And I think that's probably true. I think it shows that a musical activity for the general public is possible. There's something incredibly powerful and even addictive about this game, but it's not enough. So the next round is to figure out how to take what's good about things like Guitar Hero and push them so that they can be the kind of fulfilling, rewarding, creative, educational activities that I believe they can be. So in that area, we've been working on a variety of musical activities, starting with children. I have 2 daughters, and when we started looking for music lessons for them, I was incredibly disappointed at how little there is for young kids. You know, either you start right in on the piano or violin, which is great, but it takes years of devoted practice to make a sound which you can live with. I mean, our daughter is now 15, or at least that the parents can live with. I mean, usually the kids can't live with it either. I mean, our daughter, when she was a little pipsqueak, you know, she had very good ears. She knew good music, and she couldn't stand the sound she was making on the violin. Luckily, she played long enough to get better, but it's not that much fun. And there's no reason why kids can't be expressive and perform with other kids or even with adults and make their own music when they're very young, fall in love with music, and then go on to study. So that's what we tried to do in the Toy Symphony. We combined children with orchestras all around the world. So children are mentored by professional musicians, but they also get on stage for big-time events where they're performing or creating music as equals with some of the best musicians in the world. We invented a bunch of instruments specifically for young kids. The round instrument on the right is called a music shaper. It uses that same electricity that we discovered through Yo-Yo Ma. The thread itself measures where your fingers are touching this squeezy ball. So the embroidery is kind of like a keyboard. Depending on how we embroider it, it tells whether you want to play it in a very rigid way, if you want to squeeze it or maybe touch it lightly. And we use this, especially with young kids, to explore things like loudness and softness, texture, are things getting denser, tension in music. So there are a bunch of exercises and music written for the music shaper. The one in the middle is called a beat bug, which is a rhythm instrument. It's one of my favorite ones, and this is a little video on the beat bug.
Then there are the beat bugs. Children create rhythm by tapping on them.
And they're 2 little antennas that look like bug antennas, which allow you to change the rhythm that you've made, either change the rhythm or change the sound of it.
But the beat bugs are also networked. This means a child can create a rhythm and transmit it to someone else.
It's like a tug of war between your rhythm and that person's. You're manipulating each other's rhythms. It's a real experience, not only to learn how to play and listen to rhythms, but to train your musical memory and playing music in a group. Those are quite fun, and as you can see, we always put together, you saw a couple of adults there who were percussionists. That was the, I think, the National Symphony of Ireland, if I remember. And there were 2 adults who rehearsed with a group of 6 kids to make an ensemble, played well enough to be on stage with the orchestra and get broadcast around Europe. For Toy Symphony, in some ways, what I'm happiest about with this project, in some ways this was a surprise with Toy Symphony. A lot of the instruments were extremely attractive and fun. A lot of toy companies, some toy companies like Fisher-Price actually made toys out of them. But it was a piece of software that's really caught on the most. And my conviction in Toy Symphony was, why shouldn't a little kid be able to make his or her own original music? You go into any preschool in the world, and for the visual world, children aren't told to, imitate a photograph or to draw a chair. Little kids are given a table with materials on it, might be crayons or paste or interesting textures and scissors, and there might be a general project, but the child learns by exploring the materials with a general goal, and in that way learns everything you need to about touch and putting things together and form. And then by the time a child's about 7 or 8, the teacher starts saying, okay, let's draw a horse or let's draw a house. And not surprisingly, partly because of the request and partly because of that age, the creativity goes out the door pretty fast. It becomes a totally different kind of training. And when I was a kid, my mom's a wonderful piano teacher, and I'm the oldest of 3 kids, so I was her guinea pig. And we'd have our piano lessons, and then after the piano lesson, she would say, okay, I'm going to give you all 5 minutes to go around the house, and I want each of you to find an object around the house that makes an interesting sound and come back. So we'd all run around, find a lamp, something from the kitchen, a book, anything, come back, and she'd say, okay, let me hear what each of those sounds like. We'd each make the sound. Okay, what's the loudest sound you can make with each of those? Okay. What's the softest sound? What does it sound like if you do that one and that one at the same time? Okay, what's a word you could use to describe what that sounds like? Oh, that's interesting. And can we make a little story with those words? What might come first? How would you want to start this? And what would we do next? And in about 15 or 20 minutes, the 4 or 5 of us, really little kids, would have made a piece with those objects that was usually pretty interesting. And then she'd say, okay, and for next week when you go home, why don't you make a picture? And then when we come back next week, we'll look at the picture, we'll be able to remember it and play it again. So in that one little exercise, we realized, first of all, that music wasn't just something in printed music written by dead composers who you'd never get to meet. It wasn't something where the system of the music was determined. The system comes from nature. It comes from the world, and human beings shape it the way they want. Music is something that everybody can make. There aren't only special people who can make music. And notation, the special language of music, which keeps many people from music, isn't anything more really than a way of remembering what you did so that you can do it again and maybe interpret it differently another time. So this was really liberating for me, and we tried to do the same thing. So we made something called Hyperscore, which is software that uses line and color, very simple interface to write sophisticated pieces of music. You draw little fragments of music first. Each fragment gets a color, and then you draw with those colors on a larger screen, and all the rules of music are inside the software. So you can leave it exactly the way you want, making every gesture, every note, every sound very precise. But you can also say, I want some help with the harmonies or the rhythm so it fits together. And that big blue line in the middle actually allows you to draw the way the harmony progresses. So it's pretty sophisticated. Here's a little video on Hyperscore.
Hyperscore is a computer program that gives children the power to compose. They only have to be able to draw a line.
It allows you to compose a piece of music without knowing anything about the rules of music or without knowing musical notation. It uses a graphic language that we developed, and you draw and paint on the screen, and your marks are turned into music.
As children change the shape, length, colour and position of their lines, they create music. The software acts as a translator, taking the kids' designs and turning them into musical scores, the language of professional musicians. It all sounds impressive in theory. How does it sound in reality? The Toy Symphony has been a massive hit in Berlin, Dublin and Glasgow, with local children performing on stage with orchestras.
There you can see 2 of the girls who were in, that was the BBC Symphony playing. We did a variety of Toy Symphony events in the UK. That was in Glasgow, where we worked in a really tough inner city school environment with kids who'd never made music at all before. And they ended up writing totally amazing pieces that were played by the BBC Symphony, broadcast on Radio 3 all around the world, actually. And that's all the kids who used that are still involved in music in some way. I wanted to play you a little snippet of one of my favorite pieces. This was from a workshop in Dublin. Again, about a 10-year-old boy. Fiachra McGowarty was his name. Don't try to spell that. That was hard. He made this piece. One of the hardest things when you run a workshop is to get kids to name their pieces, because a great thing about music is that it touches us deeply, it unleashes people's emotions, people's experiences, but it's amazing. You can work in a group on your composition, you can get mentored to get help to make your composition better, but if you don't want to, if you're shy, you don't have to say exactly what emotion or what experience or what person or what part of your life you're representing in music. It can remain abstract. So a lot of kids make their pieces, and then at the end, when you say, what's it called? They go, I don't know. So we usually spend a session thinking about what it sounds like and naming it. So he named this one Attack of the Headless Chickens. This is played by the National Orchestra of Ireland, and I'll just move my finger so you can see where it's playing. Get a giggle out of that. It's a nice piece. Can you turn up the volume, actually, for now on? So this composing language, Hyperscore, we've brought to many different places. It works extremely well in museums, where people can walk in out of the, off the street and try it or get mentored. The Children's Museum in Mexico City is one of the best. They have a whole team of mentors there full-time. You can go in and learn how to compose any time of day, any day of the week. We've partnered with a lot of performing arts centers, like the new Rem Coalhouse designed Casa da Musica in Porto, where there's a big education center that runs Hyperscore. It's also installed in most of the schools throughout Portugal. So you can learn music K through 12 by using this language, write pieces, and then go to the Casa da Musica once a month and have pieces played by the National Symphony there. We've been working with Microsoft and the Education Ministry to bring music education through Hyperscore to China. And we've been extending it to many other ages. I'm quite interested in the use of music to bring families together, to unlock potential in anybody, and especially for use of music by seniors, both individually and for communities. So we work very closely with AARP on Hyperscore and other music activities. And the work we've done in all these areas, in every single instance, has shown that people are capable of doing amazing things with music when given the right opportunities, that it opens up doors, and that it's incredibly stimulating in many ways, so much so that we've taken seriously the idea that music can have a very important effect on people's health. One of the things that Oliver Sacks talked about on PBS 2 days ago is that music mysteriously has a stronger effect on things like Parkinson's disease. It's one of the only things that can get people moving when they have Parkinson's, moving synchronously. It's one of the best ways to restore speech to people who've lost speech through strokes. It's one of the last things that Alzheimer's patients still respond to, and on and on and on and on. There's something about music that seems to integrate with more parts of our brain and with our body than any other activity. And we're trying to understand why so that we can make experiences for people. The way we started with this was taking that same Hyperscore software and bringing it to a hospital north of Boston for a physical and mental disability patients, long-term patients. Didn't know what to expect. That was a few years ago, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences any of us had. Patients from throughout the hospital participated in this program for months, were sharing their pieces, wrote amazing pieces, and it changed their life, and now it's being used in medical contexts all over the place. Here's a little bit about Hyperscore at Tewkesbury Hospital.
We were running these workshops and encouraging patients to compose. We were all very amazed at what happened by the end of this three-month session. Patients were excited about coming to the Hyperscore sessions. There was marked decrease in the mental health department in self-damaging behaviors and things over the course of the week. so that they could come to Hyperscore work. They were sharing their pieces, they were excited about the things they had created, and working with a real group dynamic. And when you think about the type of socialization that was taking place, it has real implications for very specific treatments involving these sorts of creative music activities.
So one of the people you saw in a couple of scenes back was a young man named Dan Elsey. Right now he's in his early 30s. And he was a perfect example of how this kind of music project can make a difference in someone's life. So he's a guy who has cerebral palsy. He's had it since birth. He can't speak. He talks through he has a very primitive head-mounted display that he points at a computer mounted on his wheelchair, so he can with great difficulty, piece together words and phrases. He moves with difficulty and generally has a difficult time expressing himself. When he was exposed to Hyperscore, it turned out that he was very interested in music, and it turned out that he was quite good at it, but had never had the ability to do anything. So the first thing we did is we took his head tracker, made a better version of it, so that he could actually point on the screen and control those lines and shapes for Hyperscore himself. So first he learned the software, wrote a couple of pieces, then he became quite good at making his own pieces, and has gotten quite good at Hyperscore. It turns out he has a lot to express as a composer. So in the first round of experiments at Tewkesbury, he wrote a terrific piece. Didn't say it explicitly, but when you make a piece in Hyperscore, you can push a button and it writes out regular music notation. So you can write a piece for an orchestra or a string quartet or a rock band or whatever you want to. So Dan did that. He wrote for the local orchestra. And then a couple of years ago, we went back and said, okay, Dan, you're getting really good as a composer. How would you like to perform your own pieces? Now here's somebody who has a very hard time moving at all, let alone predicting what movement happens at what time, not so obvious. He was very interested, so we worked to make an even better version of an infrared head tracker, and mostly worked on software that would, if you think of it, it's kind of a perfect bookend to the Yo-Yo Ma story. You know, here's Yo-Yo, who has the best control of any performer in the world, probably, and here's Dan Elsey bursting with a desire to communicate with almost no control. But it's very similar software that looks at the movements and the piece itself and when movements happen and the pattern of movements and extracts meaning from that. With Dan Elsey, what we had to do is get rid of a lot of noise and say, oh, if he's moving like this, the intention is to make this voice more prominent, or the intention is, yes, he's building intensity towards this downbeat, and we've worked with him, we know that this downbeat is a place that's important to him, so let's make something special happen there. So it's a very special instrument that measures him as he performs his own music. Dan actually came out with me to the TED conference in Monterey, California, a little over a year ago, and performed his piece there. He's performed, we've helped him perform this a lot of places. Here's a little clip of Dan performing his piece, My Eagle Song, at the TED conference. By moving his head. Yeah. Maybe we'll bring Dan here next year. So this is the start of something. One of the most, besides the fact that Dan and so many people are brimming with the desire to communicate and express themselves, music is a great way. We think there are ways that we can help people express themselves through music. There's something else important about this, which is that however sophisticated the Hypercello was that we built for Yo-Yo Ma, that kind of instrument is designed for any cellist. You know, any cellist, it's designed for a cellist. You take the cello, you make your interpretation, depending on how you use the bow, play that music, it responds. What's different about the instrument with Dan is that this was fine-tuned so that, first of all, it had to be fine-tuned so that it could make sense out of his particular skills and his particular limitations. but it's really an instrument that only he could play. It's a personal instrument designed for him. So it allows him to show who he is through music in a way that he can't any other way. But it's an instrument that uses everything that's special about him. And my own sense is that not just for musical instruments, but for all this technology that we use, a next step is to have technology that really is a personal computer or a personal device, which they're not at all right now, which responds and measures and follows our most natural ways of expressing ourselves. We're far from that, but I think we're now at the threshold of inventing this kind of technology. I want to switch gears for a minute for one last category, which is I do this crazy work with music and technology, and I write operas is another thing I do. They're both very practical things to do, but for some reason I do them both. And for me, opera is the way to bring together all that music does so wonderfully, which is to communicate directly to our guts, to get under our skin, to tell these wordless stories. But if you add words in the right way and add real people on stage and add some kind of story, I find that if it's done in the right way, it can let the music soar even more. It gives it a grounding in the human experience. It focuses us in a certain way, and to me, it's a really great form. And it turns out, I don't know how many of you are opera fans at all, but it turns out that what might seem like a pretty stodgy form is actually one of the more exciting, experimental, interesting forms to work in right now in the world. And I've done some of the more varied operas that you'll find. I did a science fiction opera for the Pompidou Center. We built a whole building in Germany where you experience the opera by walking through and the music changes around you. I did one opera kind of normal based on Tolstoy's last book. Promise never to do that again. But no, it was, so I've done a lot of different kinds. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of two very recent ones. My latest opera is one that I finished. It was premiered in England last November. It's called Skellig. It's based on a wonderful book for young adults. I don't know how many of you know Skellig, written by David Almond, a great English author, and was commissioned by a place called the Sage Gateshead, another fantastic new performing arts center, this one designed by Norman Foster. And it's one of the places in the world that combines the highest level music making with real contact with the community, with music for children and music for seniors, everything I believe in one place, which is why we got along so well. Skellig, very, very briefly, is a story about two young people, a guy named Michael who moves to a new house, hates it, doesn't want to be there, the house is falling down, grumpy, he's got a baby sister who's very ill, nothing's right, his parents aren't paying any attention. The one thing his parents say is, whatever you do, don't go into the garage. So, of course, the first thing he does is go into the garage, and he finds a bum living there, some creature who just growls at him and barks at him and isn't very pleasant at all, smells badly, is eating insects. And the more he goes back to the barn, the more he realizes that he doesn't give up on this creature. He decides to try to help him with his friend Mina, the girl. And turns out that this creature is actually an angel who's been so discouraged with how awful the world is that he's given up. And by these two young people caring for him, his faith is restored, and he comes back into the world, and in return gives a sense of meaning to Michael and Mina and cures the baby. It's got a nice happy ending. One thing unusual in this project is that it involves an orchestra and some of the best singers in the world, but because it's a piece for young adults, kind of age 12 to 18, and also because it's a piece where there's a real contrast between this awful, disgusting world in the garage filled with animals and beasts and scary sounds and nature sounds, and this angel who little by little is becoming human and then something more than human. There's a very huge possibility for a sound world in this opera, and I decided to use a chorus of teenagers, of ordinary teenagers, not conservatory students, to be on stage with these great performers and to represent the kind of world in between Skellig as an animal and the world of music or the world of transcendence. So we had a variety of techniques for training. We auditioned all over the UK. All we were looking for were young people who were passionately interested in being in a story like this and being on stage. And we trained them both as musicians and as dancers. And there were notices all around Europe about how incredible these young people performed. And it was just because of the context and I think the way we were able to train them. So that's what Skellig looks like in his final state. And this is just a very short clip of a few scenes from the opera.
I can't. I'm ill. I'm sick. Death.
So if you want to see the rest of Skellig, looks like it's coming to London and around the US, probably not to Aspen, but I guess you never know, in the season after next, so keep your eyes out for that. And I wanted to end this part before I wrap up with a nutty opera, the one I'm working on right now. And this is a project called Death and the Powers. It's an opera which involves robots and thinks about life after death. I'll tell you a little more in a minute. It has a real dream team of collaborators. The libretto was written by Robert Pinsky, who, as you might know, was poet laureate during the Clinton administration. The director is Diane Paulus, who recently has gotten a lot of attention for directing the Broadway revival of Hair, and is also now the artistic director of the American Repertory Theater at Harvard. And Alex McDowell, who's the production designer, probably the best-known production designer in Hollywood, who did Minority Report, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and many other films. It's a story about a guy named Simon Powers, who's a rich, successful, slightly strange man in his late 60s, maybe 70. Think of him kind of as a combination of Walt Disney meets Bill Gates meets Howard Hughes, somebody like that. And he's a little different than Ray Kurzweil, the guy who wants to live forever. Simon Powers actually doesn't really want to live forever. He wants to leave the world, but he wants everything about himself to stay. His memories, his ability to interact with the people he loves, his ability to still influence the world. So with his family and with his research assistant, he figures out a way to take all of his memories and to download them into his environment. So the idea is he wants to leave, but he wants everything to stay. So the main character in the opera is actually the stage set. The singer is there at the beginning of the opera, and then he says, "The system is ready, I'll see you later," and he leaves. The singer is actually James Maddalena, one of the great baritones, some of you might know him. And he leaves the stage, and little by little the stage, the objects on the stage, the furniture, the set itself, which is like his library, gigantic bookcases, all start moving and making noise. And there's a chorus of robots who assist in this process. So I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the unusual props for this opera. There's a gigantic chandelier, really quite large, which looks like a chandelier at first, hangs right in the middle of the set, but is actually a large robotic music instrument. It's a string instrument strung with about 150 strings, and both by sending an electric signal through them and also by having little robotic fingers and wheels and devices that we're making this summer, actually. The strings vibrate without anybody physically being there. They're either pre-programmed or puppeteered by people in the orchestra pit. This is what the elements look like. This is part of my team who's working on this at this very moment. The chandelier is what the chandelier looks like when it rotates, and you'll hear a little bit of part of what it sounds like. You'll see a little bit of the mechanism. We have a chorus of robots, as I told you. I mean, opens in 2010. Why not have a chorus of robots? But the robots are the kind of the assistants of Nicholas, who's the research assistant. He built them, and they help him make this system. And they're also kind of intermediary for Simon to speak to people still left in the world. We're actually building these right now. The robots are about 4 feet tall, and they extend to be about 8 feet tall. They're totally autonomous, which is incredibly cool. That means that they meander around on stage all on their own. They don't have wires or tethers. They have eyes, so they know where to go, we hope. They're pretty big, actually, so if they don't go the right place, it's a little scary. In fact, this is just taken a few days ago, so these are the guys building this thing. They're very fast. This will show you. Yeah, that's kind of half speed.
It really spins.
Yeah. A little wobbly. We're making them less wobbly, but they follow performers. They move out on their own. They go into groups. They sort of meander, and they can line up very precisely as well. And we're working this summer also to give them a voice. And they also follow music. So this is a little clip of an earlier version that robots as little cubes that listen to a musical score, have a choreography, and synchronize very precisely. Those are the graphics to design the movement. And here are the real robots just sitting in our lap. And one of the interesting, actually quite challenging demands of this particular project is the other projects I've shown you. Again, I'll go back to Yo-Yo Ma. It's a new instrument, new sounds come out of it. He may make one gesture and many sounds come out, but you see Yo-Yo on stage, and part of the drama is the relationship between a human being and a new technology, what that balance should be, how to evaluate what is being played, how it's being played. In this opera, we have a main character who disappears for most of the opera, but everything that's left is him. You have to believe that the stage and everything that's moving and singing and vibrating is really him. So how to do that? We're calling this disembodied performance. You can think of it as teleportation. What would happen if you were here and you wanted to communicate with somebody across the world, and your essential personality and body movement and presence really could be felt by somebody there. This is the effect that we're trying to get. So we're doing this in a variety of different ways. One thing we're doing is measuring things about a performer that are not usually things you think about, like muscle tension, where you might be singing, body gesture, which happens while you sing, your breathing, maybe how your breathing muscles are changing while you're singing. And this is one of my students, Ellie Jessup, is working on this in particular. This is her with the main character, Jim Madalena, just a couple of weeks ago, trying on some of these sensors. And here's a little clip of Ellie showing her own performance. She's just singing, and by moving her arm, she can grab her own notes, sustain them, and change them. Very simple, but it's a bit of where we're going. And this is just a little tiny clip of the sound and the sense of the moment where Simon leaves the stage and becomes part of the system. A little bit of what it looks like and sounds like, and to see a little bit of his shadow on stage, what that might look like. And I made a little video clip. This is kind of like a trailer. I put this together, and actually you'll notice it uses my students instead of the performers, so you'll recognize a few people. Just a little trailer to give you a sense of what this opera will feel like. And the general sense of the opera, of course, is what can we pass on to those that we love? What does our life add up to? How do we represent it? What can we share? What do people want to be left from us? What do they not want? And thought the best way to show you would be to make this little clip. So here's just a tiny little trailer for Death and the Powers. So this one, if you want to see it, we're doing a music workshop in Boston this fall. You have to come to Monaco. Now, that's a terrible place to have to go to. You have to go to Monaco in September 2010 to see the premiere, and then it'll be back in the States, a variety of places during that coming season. That's what I'm working on right now, so I'll stay here another day or so and then go back to finish it. So to close, this is a lot of work. We're very busy, but what happens next? Where might all these things be going? I wanted to just give you a few quick ideas. I made a point for how opera is truly a grand form right now, and there are incredible possibilities about expanding what a live performance is like. But there are also remarkable opportunities in making music with and for the kind of devices that we have around us all the time, in particular the iPhone, a lot of portable devices. The iPhone's really an interesting one right now. So one thing we're doing this summer is taking Hyperscore, the composing language I showed you, and putting it on the iPhone. So we think that'll be a fun place to make compositions, share compositions, trade them, modify them. We also are thinking that if Simon Powers has the opportunity to make his legacy in the form of an opera, in the form of this system in Death and the Powers, we'd like to make a tool available so that anybody can make their own personal story, their own legacy, either for themselves or for a loved one, in this form as part of this opera experience. So we're thinking of something called personal opera, which will be a way of taking your memories and the clutter in your life, things that might be stored on your different devices, might be, for instance, already on your iPhone or pulled in from all the content on the web, with a set of tools to shape them into a very powerful, perhaps brief experience of a moment or a person or an impression or an experience. And I asked one of my students to make just a little model of what this might be like. This is just for fun. This is something he made on an iPhone, and it's he took a trip that he and his wife made from Boston to San Francisco, made a musical score, and then we wrote some software to adapt the pictures to tell a story that went with this music. So it's all done automatically. It's just kind of a fun thing, but I kind of like it. Thought you might be interested. It's kind of fun. He didn't finish it, unfortunately. That's the problem with grad students. They graduate and then they... and we're also doing a lot of work this summer in thinking about what it would be like to be able to bring a device of your own to something like Death and the Powers when it opens. And there are many things that might be possible between what happens on stage and your own device. I mean, one thing that might be possible is to use everyone's iPhone or cell phone in the audience as a loudspeaker. So you could imagine actually calling people's phones during the performance and having a sound rush off stage and go through the audience or end up right in front of you. You could imagine doing the opposite, which is taking something about your life or some bit of music or some impression that you have and having the ability to send that to stage to be incorporated in Simon's memory bank at some point in the opera. Many, many different ways that a device as powerful as an iPhone might be able to make a different kind of connection between a performance and an audience. So we're working hard on that. When we looked at Dan Elsey, we saw this concept of personal instrument, an instrument designed specifically for him. But I think one of the really exciting next frontiers is music that could be adapted for each of us, not the same music in exactly the same form that is listened to by everybody. So a first big project that we're doing is based on Alzheimer's disease, and it's based on listening. That's a picture of John Cage, who was a very important 20th century American composer, as many of you know. And Cage said that music is nothing more than being able to listen very, very carefully to the world around us. And we're taking that seriously and looking at listening activities now. We're looking at them particularly in terms of Alzheimer's disease. It's fairly well known, or scientists think that they know, where Alzheimer's begins in the brain. And as you might know, detecting Alzheimer's early enough to be able to start treatment is one of the most difficult problems. It's basically not solved now. By the time Alzheimer's symptoms appear, it's too late for any of the existing treatments to do any good. So we're looking at what's known about very early where Alzheimer's turns up. We're working with the Alzheimer's Association, Harvard, and McLean Hospital. We've developed a series of music applications, again, on an iPhone that allow people to listen to music, to make judgments about music, to match music, to indicate what they like about certain pieces of music, and to do this over and over again. One of the nice things about music is that since people like participating in music, especially if you design an activity well enough, people will use this over and over and over again, so that a system like this, which is trying to learn something about a person, actually has a pretty good chance of gathering enough good data to be useful. And then over time, we take an analysis of the way people are using these music activities, these music tests, and we're just about to roll this out at McLean Hospital near Boston with Alzheimer's patients. By October, we're expecting to have findings to see if this is going to be a better way of tracking early onset Alzheimer's than anything else. So we will let you know. And as I said, there's so many strong relationships between our musical memory, musical response, musical ways of comparing music, that we think that there is a very large amount of work that we can do around Alzheimer's with music. But if you go a step further, measurement of each of our brain activity is getting better, and it's also getting cheaper. The device on the lower left is a commercially available device. There are many devices being built at MIT that are not more complicated than putting a hat on. And we're doing more and more research, and many colleagues are doing research in what happens in your brain when you listen to various pieces of music. And I think it's not at all inconceivable that somewhere not too far down the line, you might have a musician, somebody like Edge of U2, who in playing a concert for you, or perhaps in making a new piece for you, or improvising for you, would take account of the particular structure of your brain, your experiences, what you respond to more than what else, in many, many different dimensions, and would create, perform, and deliver a piece of music which was absolutely personalized only for you, only for your experience right now. And the right now is very important in a medical context, or you can imagine in a psychiatric context. How can you make a piece of music that serves a particular function for an individual at a particular time? And that kind of personal music is something that I think is really possible, and something that we are going to be working on in a very strong way. Now, this kind of ideal, very compelling relationship between somebody like Edge and any of us leads me to my last point, which I'll use to sum up. And in many ways, it's the opposite of what exists in the world right now. So, you know, I enjoy. How many people here follow American Idol? Oh, that's amazing. Much less than the national average, I would venture. Yeah, so you know my point about this. I mean, it's actually kind of fun, although I got less interested this year. What's awful about it, though, is that everything about music which I've been speaking against is promoted in something like American Idol. It promotes celebrity against everybody making music. It's a competition. It's about who's better than somebody else. I mean, the music's not the best music either. And so it just is not really the model of where we want to go. Sorry if you think. My wife's here. She really likes Adam Lambert. I'm very sorry for anybody else who does. But it's not the model. And I took a cue from the event last night. You know, Shakespeare's a big part of this this festival this year. So if you look at the quote, "If music be the food of love, play on," I'm going to end by taking that kind of literally in an unusual way. So I actually think that one of the best things we could do right now is to ask that music look at very carefully and aspire to the role that cuisine has in our culture. Now, that's a pretty odd notion. But if you think about it, the relationship that we all have to food and to food culture, in my view, is a lot healthier than the relationship that we have to music and to most of the arts, for that matter, and actually to most cultural and intellectual activities. In cuisine, most of us appreciate and enjoy going to a very fine restaurant. We went to a great restaurant last night, wonderful experience. But most of us also don't have any problem either improvising an interesting meal, or following a recipe by somebody that we respect, or improvising around a recipe. So we'll make a special meal for family or friends on special occasions. But we also eat all the time. So we throw food together in the breakfast as the kids are running out the door. We have a whole range of eating that we do at lunch. But the important thing is that the connection between the simplest everyday experience we have with food and our ability to appreciate and learn from great chefs, to look at food from all over the world without feeling intimidated, it's actually a very rich, wonderful, integrated experience. And I think that's what we need to reconstruct in the 21st century. What we really need is a new kind of musical ecology where there's a much more integrated connection between experts and children and people who love music and are not necessarily trained in music, everybody all through the spectrum. And we need to go back to a period where it's just fun to sit around and make music at home. These are our daughters just last week. They don't do this every day, but often enough, singing and playing together. Wonderful projects like in the UK, a new project called Sing Up, where $500 million has been invested to get the entire country singing, to learn about music through singing, K through 12, to get families singing together, to bring orchestras, publishers, music centers, schools together around singing. An amazing project. Just the joy of being by yourself and playing music. It's one of the things that I enjoy the most. Not playing for anybody else, just using music to think, to meditate, to experience. It's one of the best things in life. Incidentally, that's me about the time I was at Aspen the first time, a little while ago. And just listening. The ability to listen with your full being in a concentrated, focused way to get the full experience of music through listening. This is a new magazine that just came out, by the way, called Listen. To bring these activities and to integrate them in our culture, this is what the big challenge is. And in bringing all of these values and visions together, I think we can really transform what music means in our culture so that music can transform us to its full power. And in doing this, we can restore and maintain music, use music to restore and maintain our health, to open our hearts, to define and express everything about ourselves, and to strengthen and enrich our ties to others. I think music helps us do this in ways that no other activity does. Thanks very much for listening. I think I'm on time. We have time for questions, comments, anything. Yes. Do we have a mic? Maybe we don't need a microphone for this, but excuse me? Okay. There are two microphones. If you don't want to walk over there, I'm happy to repeat a question.
Hello. Hi.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really fascinating. I apologize, I missed the first part. But my question is with regard to sort of new opera and the audience appetite. And I sort of probably have an erroneous perception that opera is sort of a 19th, maybe early mid-20th century phenomenon, but it's based on the repertoire that you see at many opera houses, and there's not that much room for new operas. I'm wondering if you can just address that, given the great things that you're doing.
So it's absolutely true in some ways that, like a lot of classical music, there was a fantastic boom of wonderful music starting about in 1700, really hit its form in late 1700s, 1800s, into the early 20th century, and we all love that music. So most of the opera houses and most of the orchestras and a lot of the chamber music, you look at the music at the festival next door, one of the world's great festivals, a lot of it is taken up with that repertoire because we do love it so much. One of the surprising things about opera is that, it's a pretty scrappy art form. It developed very late. It didn't even exist until about 1600 when a bunch of people got together in Italy and said, these madrigals, people are singing music many different lines at the same time. We can't understand the words. How can we make this simpler so you can understand the words? That turned into drama. I think because of the fact that it brings together a lot of people from different disciplines, who are really trained differently and they have different culture. You've got performers, musicians, you have director, actors, lighting people, librettists. I think a lot of people in the opera world actually are looking for bold experiences and are willing to take a chance. So not everywhere, but there are more places than you'd think where opera is actually about the hottest art form right now. I mean, it's not why I went into it. I went into it because I had an intuition that it could be, but little by little, London, for instance, a day doesn't go by where there isn't an article in the London press, number one, saying, oh my God, look what's going on in opera, and then number two, with some crazy new opera. Like, you probably heard about the Jerry Springer opera. You know, somebody in London had the idea of doing an opera that was basically, you know, the length and format of a Jerry Springer show that managed to take, you know, also, the thing that opera does so well is it allows us to get behind the emotions of, you know, behind the emotions of the words, behind the emotions of the story. So if you do it right with the Jerry Springer show, all of a sudden the implications of, my gosh, you know, why are these people revealing their lives like this? What is Jerry Springer's role? It was an amazing, amazing project. I think in some ways the States is a little bit behind because the opera houses themselves tend to be a little bit stodgy. But even, you know, look at the Metropolitan Opera, which 5 years ago was kind of, you know, people were ready to, I mean, it had financial problems. It had a very old demographic. It was very conservative. They brought in Peter Gelb, who had made his, you know, made his name as, for basically producing music videos for classical music for Columbia artists. And then he was head of Sony Classical Music. A very good marketing guy, very clever. And he said, you know, look, even with the traditional operas, there's no reason why this is an art form that shouldn't be immediate, direct. How many of you have been to one of the HD cinema broadcasts of a Metropolitan Opera? So they, once a month for the last 2 years, they've been broadcasting in high def opera to normal movie theaters around the country and actually around the world now. When I first heard this, I thought, you know, who's going to go to that, number one? And number two, it can't possibly translate. You know, here's this gigantic art form and, you know, you're going to flatten it on a screen. But, you know, it turns out to be incredibly effective. It's produced very, very well, so it's not done cheaply. They have cameras all over the place. They produce it like a high-quality movie. So each camera person knows, you know, has the script, and they know exactly what's happening when. They can go backstage. They can do close-ups. They can do interviews with performers and intermission. I mean, it's remarkable. And that's just with existing repertoire. So I actually, you know, there's a long way to go, and God knows with the economy, operas are suffering more than most because it's an expensive art form. But there are amazing things that can be done not so expensively, and this idea of music with story, with you know, there's an immediacy. Technology is, you know, you can do fantastic things with not so many people on stage. Technology can make it easier in some ways to make inexpensive opera. So I think it's got a real future. Yes.
Well, this question is somewhat related. Could your opera be done in a proscenium theater without a symphony orchestra as well as a regular opera house? And the second part is, do you already have all the venues for where your opera is going to be in the United States? Right.
So each opera I do is different. I think you're probably asking about The Death and the Powers, the one with the robots and things. Yeah. So that opera is actually designed for an orchestra. And it is actually designed for a proscenium setup. So it's designed for, you know, one of the questions with a project like that, and we've actually spent a lot of time trying to make it workable in as many different size venues as possible. I mean, it's not so easy when you have, you know, walls that move around the stage and robots all over the place. But it is you know, it's designed for proscenium. It's designed for most normal size halls. We're actually designing it now so it will work well in not such large halls. It was designed for an orchestra pit, so the orchestra isn't an orchestra pit. They're mostly unseen, as in a traditional opera. And, you know, we're also designing it, a good thing, it costs a lot of money to build and put on, but it's also fairly self-sufficient so that it isn't that hard to, you know, it comes with the technicians and with the scenery and the stage set. So it isn't that hard to bring into a venue and set up. It actually goes quickly. And we have, I would say, you know, we have certain of our venues in the United States, and we're still, you know, it'll go to the American Repertory Theater in Boston. It'll go to Chicago Opera Theater in Chicago. There's several places in New York that are talking about it. It'll likely go to the Kennedy Center. It'll likely go to San Francisco Opera. And hopefully several other places. Yes.
Hi, I'm going to say this. I'd like to preface my question, and I'm saying this as someone who
Could
absolutely...
you maybe talk, it's not so loud, maybe
Okay.
talk close.
I'm going to preface my question a little bit, and I'm saying this as somebody who just loves my Ocarina app.
Oh yeah, I was gonna mention that.
Yeah.
How many of you have seen the Ocarina by Smule on the iPhone? Yeah. So this is an example. I just prefaced your question by saying, the iPhone, that's not a music instrument. But this is a guy named Gay Wang who went to Princeton, got his PhD, and now is at Stanford University, who has a company called Smule that makes music applications for the iPhone. And he made one which is an ocarina. An ocarina is a simple wind instrument with just a few, air holes usually. But they simulated this on the iPhone so that you use the microphone to blow into, so that's your air hole. And on the screen of the iPhone, there are a few different modes, but it has these beautiful little, it's almost like ripples in a pond for each of the finger holes. So it shows you where your fingers go. And it's fantastic. It sounds beautiful. People love it. It's very successful. And there's a whole community around the world of people who trade ocarina songs that they performed, write their own pieces. There's a notation that's developed around this. So anyway, I don't know what you're going to say about that related to any of this, but I love that app.
Yeah, it's a super cool app. And I also happen to sing with a semi-professional choral ensemble in Louisville, Kentucky. But my question is really about, I guess, the relationship between these new technologies and traditional art forms, such as choral singing or just acoustic instruments and traditional orchestras. What's the role there?
Yeah, great question. I think, I don't want to say I'm the only, but I think one thing unique about what I do, and partly because I grew up as a cellist and love traditional music and love acoustic sound, and actually my mom's a piano teacher and my dad's one of the people who started the field of computer graphics. So I sort of grew up with these two worlds and have been trying to bring them together, and it's very, very hard. And it's very hard for a variety of reasons. One is that, especially with, well, in some ways, it's the two examples you picked, the human voice and the orchestra, they don't really need technology very much. I mean, the voice does everything you'd ever want to do just here. It doesn't need anything else. And same with an orchestra. There may be things I want with an orchestra, but it developed over a long period of time, those balances of instruments, the holes that they were built for, it's perfectly tuned. It's actually hard to decide what to do. I ran a symposium at Carnegie Hall about 6 years ago, specifically looking at how the orchestra and technology might work together. And we put on concerts and asked questions so there is not a glib answer to this. I personally think that, at the very least, technology is so much a part of how we communicate now, is so much a part of marketing and information. And there's no way that you can be a music organization, even if just today I got an email from the Boston Camerata, one of the country's earliest and most famous early music ensembles. And they sent me an email with their new website and all the new features on their website for, all for music written before 1500. So they're investing in that because they know it's the only way that they can keep their audience informed, that they can provide information. So there are all kinds of ways that orchestras have to bring the public in through technology. I personally think that the repertoire that was written for a cappella voice or that was written for traditional orchestra, those are some of the treasures of our culture. They're never going to go away. We're always going to have orchestras that play these. We're always going to have professional and semi-professional choruses that sing all the music that exists. Thank God. I mean, 90% of the music I listen to is 16th century English vocal music, just because I love it, and it's the music I love the most. But the world changes, and I personally think that there's no particular reason that the mechanical limitations of instruments that, most instruments haven't evolved for over 100 years. And the fact that they're very difficult to play, the fact that you make one gesture and one sound comes out, this is very foreign to most other ways that we interact. We're much more used to interacting with things where the meaning of the object that we relate to might be multiple and might be able to change depending on the use we have of it. So something like these hyperinstruments, something like an instrument which is part acoustic and part something else, I personally think we're going to be seeing more and more of. There are more and more music conservatories. I'm also a visiting professor at the Royal Academy of Music in London, and we've set up a laboratory for hyperinstruments so that most composers and most string players who go through the Royal Academy now learn how to play a new kind of violin, which use their technique to play a violin which can do more than a normal violin. Learn how to think about it as a performer to, what kind of music would you want to see out of this? How would you perform a concert with this? How would you blend this into an orchestra in the future? So I think we're going to see, technology is going to be part of every single music organization for the way it reaches out to the public. But I think more and more the way the music sounds and the way the music's played is going to be some kind of hybrid. I think so. Probably for the voice too, although not quite yet. That's the hardest.
Hyperscore. Does one have to be instructed how to use it, or can you just buy it and self-teach?
Yeah, you can buy. It's very, very easy to learn. You can go to hyperscore.com, download it. There are some pretty good tutorials, and I think it's quite easy to get going. One thing, part of the music ecology idea I provided at the end, one thing we haven't quite figured out. I'm actually interested to Edith Caperton, who's an old friend and colleague of mine, who's an expert in the area of creative activities for young people and how to provide societies and infrastructures to reinforce creativity. What you really need for something like Hyperscore is a new way of, let's say you want to learn it. You'll learn it in 10 minutes, and you'll make some fun pieces, and hopefully you'll want to make more. What's difficult is to find, and we have a website, we have a web community where you can go and trade your music with somebody else who might be making. But what you really want is to be able to go, it's just what Arnie Duncan said yesterday. You want to be able to find an absolutely inspired teacher who has that special gift of listening to this piece that you made, knowing that you just started, seeing the gem of something original and interesting in what you did, because there certainly is one, and probably online, just give you a little guidance. It's very hard to know how that kind of infrastructure gets set up, because a lot of these kind of activities, not through school necessarily, maybe in the kind of expanded school he was talking about yesterday, but I don't think so. The kind of organizations that Edith sets up, that's one of the reasons is to set up a new. Edith, do you have any? Carrie,
you said it. It's about the tools, but also about the learning environment, the peers next to you that can inspire you, the ones that you teach that can inspire you, and the one that the experts on demand that can.
And how in the future, how do we get more access to the experts on demand who are motivated and really? It's hard enough, as we said, to find these brilliant experts on demand who are going to be in our schools, let alone people who who are incredible mentors and incredibly perceptive and are willing to spend time with amateurs to help them along to raise the bar for everyone. How's that going to happen?
It's a combination of people like you and your team and your colleagues worldwide being on a social network of some sort that is opting in to be part of that community, as well as it spreads, some people can just self-organize, as we know really well, and supplies the original choreographs by creating their own sub-communities around Hyperscore-like tools or any other learning tools. And so we see how those things are emerging over time.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe one more question, then we'll let you go to your next activity.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, first of all. My name's Spencer Casimir. I play music.
I'm sorry, say it again?
I play music as well. I found that...
I'll put you in my next slide.
Excellent.
Next presentation.
Perfect. I found that even as of 10 years ago compared to now, there's been a fairly large regression, actually, if you look at Rock Band. In around 98, they introduced the electronic drum set in video game arcades where you would actually learn to play the beats and the rudiments, whereas now on Rock Band, you're just playing a made-up bit. And it seems to go that way with music as well, that a lot of music, or if you look at early techno even, if you look at Prodigy and whatnot, there was a lot of live performance and a lot of control over what you were actually doing. Whereas now, there just seems to be a trend of regression. Everything's becoming very oversimplified, and personally, I'm terrible at writing by hand. I do everything by ear, and not that sophisticated. And I love the idea of having a score program of that sorts. But do you think that in a certain way could also contribute to a more homogeneous sound in music that will be coming out?
Well, I think the real answer to your point, and I'm glad you brought it up, is that it's a very important, because things like Rock Band and Guitar Hero have gotten so successful, it's a really important time for any of us who can and want to speak up and say, yes, there's something good about that, but that's not the goal. That's not what music's about. And there's, let's learn from that, but there's a whole other reason that music exists that we have to fight for. And it's not a surprise, because these things have gotten so successful. Now the model for people understand pretty well, or think they do, why they're. Since these things came out of my lab, there's hardly a day that goes by where I don't get an email from somebody, from either a big company, a little company, saying, we know these came out of, what's the next Rock Band? What's the next Guitar Hero? What do we do next? And what they're all looking for is something, just like you said, simple and big hit commercially. And, the guys, Alex and Iran, who made this stuff, as you probably know, the next big thing coming out is the Rock Band version of I don't know if it's the complete, but huge amount of the Beatles repertoire, and I'm just scared, I love that music so much. I can't imagine it's going to be anything but grotesque. Maybe, I'm sure they'll do it very, very well, but these are brilliant. Iran and Alex are some of the best students who ever went through the Media Lab at MIT. They're brilliant. They're great musicians. They're amazing people. But the economic pressures are so huge now to make, everything that comes out has to be very successful. They don't do any R&D really they're not really thinking about the next way to make it more expressive or more. So really it's up to the rest of us to say, okay, that's not the answer. We have to do something else. And I think that goes to your last point, which is the something else. Whatever it is that we do, the goal is to make the musical experience for each of us who participates be as rich and rewarding and creative and personal and expressive and connected as possible, period. Whatever it takes to get there is great. Whatever it takes away from that goal, we want to be vigilant against. So that's my answer. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your coming.